really miss you. So if you're sick, we hope you feel better. We're praying for you. And if you just need to drive home to see us, do that. Tiffany. All right, so we are ready to start our lesson today. Today's lesson is called Slaying Your Giants. And I just, prayed and prayed, as I always do throughout the week. Lord, what do you want me to do? Had all these ideas. And I just love how God works because he confirms it in my heart when it just, all of a sudden, the thought's there, and then he just lines it all up. And I'm just so thankful he does, especially this weekend. But most of us have heard that phrase, and I said, think movie title, Facing the Giants. And this refers to facing things that we fear in our life, and it references the story of David and Goliath, which we're going to read. But today we're going to get personal and specific and talk about slaying your giants, not just facing your giants, but slaying your giants. And it is a good amount of reading that I'm going to do right now, but I just think it's important, and I think we take for granted, everybody knows the story of David and Goliath. Well, yeah, everybody may know about a young shepherd boy who slew a giant, and that might be where it ends, and that's fine. So I don't want to take that stuff for granted. Besides that is, it doesn't matter how many times I read this passage, every time I walk away with more. That's because it's the living word. So, we're going to do some reading right now, and then we will talk about this story. So 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 1 says, Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shochoh, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shochoh and Azekah in Ephraim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side. Picture that. And there was a valley between them. Verse 4, And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, roughly over 9 feet tall. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. That's big. And his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and he cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. Talking about him, the Philistines and his big brothers that he has and himself. And then if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us, which was exactly what he thought was going to happen. Verse 10, And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we might fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next on to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. He is the shepherd boy. Verse 16, And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. Verse 20. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. And David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, they fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. Verse 26. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. Verse 28. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left the few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? Verse 30, And he turned from him toward another, and spake unto the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. They were all saying the same thing to him. Verse 31, And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. Verse 37, David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. Verse 38, And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head, and also he armed him with a coat of mail. Mind you, Saul was about a head taller than all other men. So to David, he was a lot taller. And here's David. Saul's put all of his armor on David like that. So David's swimming in it. Verse 39, And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off of him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Verse 41, And the Philistine came on, and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Verse 45, Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Whew, this is some big talk for a little guy against a over 9 foot giant. Verse 48, and it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. He's not scared. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face. So he fell forward, not backward, upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and he smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Verse 52, and the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Shaaraim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. Verse 54, and David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. Imagine this little ruddy, he was definitely under 20, because 20-year-olds went into the army and he was not in the army. So here he is with this giant's head in his hand. And Saul said unto him, whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Whew! What a story. What a true account. And I just love it. I just loved rereading it. I've grown up with this story, heard it many times in preaching, heard examples of it, and yet when I read it again to prepare for the lesson a couple times, it was just like, wow, this is incredible. And it's not a fairy tale. It is so true. So here we see young David, not yet old enough to be in the army, shepherding his father's sheep, while his 3 eldest brothers, they followed Saul to battle. Remember, kings are supposed to go to battle, and Saul was actually at the battle. But every 40 days, the champion of these Philistines, the giant Goliath of Gath, he came out morning and evening to yell at them and to defy, to defy and throw in their face that they were doing nothing. Here's Saul, taller, head and shoulders taller than any other man. So he was the closest to Goliath's height that they were going to get. And yet Saul, right along with all his valiant men, they just stood there as morning and evening Goliath came out and shouted, ha! You guys aren't going to send anybody over here? Yeah, and he was just egging them on every day and, basically mocking God, because they were the children of God. And they were, by defying the army of the Israelites, he was defying God and throwing it in their face. And he said, just send me somebody, morning and night. And yet nobody stepped forward. Saul didn't step forward. Saul didn't send anyone forward. Saul didn't send a group. They would hear this giant come out morning and evening, and they were so afraid. They cowered in fear while Goliath bashed their God and the army of God. And then we see that David's dad, Jesse, that he sent David. He said, your brothers are down there. I want to know how everything's going. Take these cheese and bread and take it and give it to them and see how they're doing. So that's what David does. And David leaves the sheep in the care of somebody else. And he goes and does this. And while he's there checking on his brother, lo and behold, it's one of the times when Goliath, so it was either the morning or the night bashing that he was doing, and out he comes, and David stops, I can picture it. David stops talking to his brothers, finding out what's going on, and turns his head and looks at this giant, and here's what he's saying as he bashes God and God's children. And David, I feel like he is just totally disgusted and enraged at this situation. He's just like, really? You guys are letting him talk this way? And they're like, yeah, man, do you see this guy? And he's got brothers over there, and they're really big too. Yeah, we're over here. And I just, here's David, small of stature. He was not a big man, even next to Saul. And David's like, man, is there not a cause? That is such a powerful statement. Is there not a cause? And Saul and the army, they saw no cause, obviously, because they stayed put morning and evening for 40 days while this went on. 40 days is a long time. 80 times that this giant come out and bash God and bash them, and they just took it. They're like, yeah, he's big. Total, just crippled by fear so that they could not do anything. And they obviously didn't see a cause. The soldier with heart is the soldier that's going to go forward into battle. The one that doesn't have heart and does not believe in the cause is going to be the one to hang back and make sure he's protected. And that's what we have here, is that they saw no cause. And if they did see a cause, it certainly wasn't big enough for them to act on it for 40 days. But David saw a cause. Verse 29, and David said, what have I now done? It just blows my mind that his brother said, his older brother Eliab said, you are so prideful to even be here. What'd you do with our father's sheep? You are prideful and your heart is naughty. Come on. And what are you doing here, Eliab? You are doing nothing. You are letting Goliath and the Philistines mock God twice a day. And you stand here. But yet when somebody else stood up, and it really bothered him that it was his little brother, that his little brother had courage, that his little brother saw the cause, that his little brother stood up for God. And so he tried to derail him by belittling him. And so the brothers told him that he was proud and naughty of heart. Saul said, you're too young. So he didn't even have Saul's, the king's, what word am I looking for? The king's support. He didn't even have the king's support in this, And yet none of that deterred David. David had seen God work in his life. Look at verses 34 and 35. And David said unto Saul, thy servant, speaking of himself, kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and I smote him, and delivered him out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him and slew him. Just picture this. This is amazing. We're not talking about, a dog or a cat or even a raccoon. We are talking about a bear and a lion, and he's grabbing him by the beard and smoting him and slew him. And verse 36, thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. And then he says, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. That's the cause. The cause is that he had defied the army of the living God. David could look back in his life and see what God had done with the bear and the lion. And he's like, man, if he can allow me to do that, he is going to allow me, because the lion and the bear weren't bashing God. But here we have this Philistine that is twice a day coming out and bashing God, bashing the armies, defying the army of God. And David says, this is not okay, and God is going to help me take care of this. So he had full confidence that God would take care of this Philistine. And David went before him with unwavering faith. Let me see here, verse 49. I love this. Now again, this is how you make God's word the living book, is you picture it in your head. When you read it, actually picture it happen. So verse 49, and David put his hand in his bag, because remember, he has a slingshot, and he's got a little bag, just a little bag with 5 stones in it, because he had said, Saul, your armor doesn't fit. Saul was a lot bigger than him, and I haven't proved it. I haven't made sure this would work for me. I'm not going to wear it. And so instead, he took what he knew, and he took his 5 little stones and his slingshot. And verse 49, David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone, and he slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon the earth. It was 48 I was looking for. And it came to pass when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David. So here comes Goliath, drew nigh to meet David. I love this next part. That David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. This little guy, his confidence in God was huge. He didn't just say, yeah, I know he's going to do it, and I'm going to stand right here, and I'm going to throw it, and God's just going to take it. No, his confidence was so big in God. His faith was so big, and he saw that cause, and he just knew. He looked back at the bear and the lion, and he's like, yeah, God, I know you're going to do this. And he ran right towards them. I think that's amazing. And that picture playing out in my head as we read that, it just shows such confidence in God. And boy, did God honor that, So he ran right towards him, got his stone out. There's a song, and one little stone went in the sling, and the sling went round and round. Mm-hmm. And round and round and round and round and round and round and round. One little stone went in the air, and the giant came tumbling down. Some have said, normally if somebody would get hit in the head with a stone, that it would knock them back. But I've heard it say, and it's just a fun thing to think about, that when the stone hit Goliath's head, God pushed him over, face down. And I like that thought, So David didn't just face the giant, he slew the giant. Webster's 1828 dictionary, I love to look up the words. There was this big thing not long ago, wake up and slay. Did you guys all hear that? Maybe even used it. I'm not trying to get into all that. I think we can use things, I don't want to say in a weird way, but in a worldly, irreverent way, and, slay and pray. I'm just not really, this is not my thing. So I'm not using it that way. But the 1828 defines slay as to kill by a weapon or violence, to destroy, to just totally destroy. When he says slay, he means slay. And I'm glad we have an account of David slaying the giant. Going back to that phrase, facing the giant. Well, actually, Saul and his army were facing the giants. And they were just facing him, and they did nothing else. They just faced him, and Goliath would get tired of mouthing, and he'd leave until he came back that night. They're facing each other. Nothing's happening. So while and I get the whole premise of it. I'm not saying anyone's wrong for saying facing the giants. I'm just saying I like slaying the giants better, because that's what God allowed David to do. He slew the giant. And just bringing that into our life is, I want us to stop and think about some giants that we may have in our life. Some things in our life that seem way bigger than what we could ever handle. Look at Goliath, over 9 feet tall, and I wish I would have had thought to look up all the weight of everything he was carrying. The man was carrying a lot of weight on him in armor and stuff. But David looked at him, and David didn't see impossible. He didn't see that because he'd seen God work in his life. He could look back to that. David saw possible. Remember, with God, all things are possible. And we are going to find in our life, pardon me, that we have giants in our life, that we have circumstances, maybe even sins or relationships in our life. And when we look at them, they seem huge. They seem impossible. But we have got to remember that all things are possible with God, and that we do not have to have that fear. This fear crippled Saul, tall Saul, big Saul, and the rest of the army, these valiant men and stuff. It crippled him to the point where they just watched him come night and day. And that is a tool of Satan, and that's not from God. Let's turn to, well, first, let's turn to Isaiah 41:10. Just talking about there not needing to be any need for us to fear, because the giants in our life are not bigger than God. Goliath of Gath, he was not bigger than God. And the giants in our life are not bigger than God. Who has Isaiah 41:10? Miss Donna?
Fear not, fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness.
You know, that would be a great verse to jot down on a note card, Isaiah 41:10, to remind ourselves that, you know, that God really, He is taking care of things, and that we don't have to look at the giant in our life and think, wow, I'm never going to get past that. You know, makes me think of things like sickness in our life, sickness or disease. Makes me think of financial hardships. Makes me think of relationships that aren't what we would want them to be. And we look at those things and think, I can't even move because I'm so paralyzed with fear at the giant in front of me. And we're facing them, but day and night, that thing comes before our face and just taunts us. And that's not, as Christians, that is not what God wants for us. God wants us to not just face the giant, He wants us to slay the giant. He gave us this example of David for a reason, that we can face these giants in our life. And I mean, you know, Goliath was so huge and so beastly compared to David. And I just love it that that's the example that God chose to give us. And not only, you know, David, I believe his brothers were not far off, and they were huge too. And then he had the rest of the Philistine army, you know. And I love how David just looked and he ran right at him. That's what we need to have the courage to do, to run right at the giant in our life, because we've seen what God has done in our life. And we can say, yeah, this giant, no giant is too big for God. Let's go to 2 Timothy 1:7. And I just like to, let me turn, all right. Okay, let me get there. 2 Timothy 1:7, go ahead, Carol.
For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but the power and of love and of a sound mind.
So that spirit of fear that Saul and the soldiers had when they looked at Goliath, that's not what God had for him. David had it right. No spirit of fear. You can see there is no spirit of fear as he runs towards Goliath. And that's what we need to do, is not have a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. You know, a sound mind will help us to think clearly, you know, and we'll be able to hear that still small voice. But we have got to make sure that we don't have that spirit of fear clouding us. Again, that is a tool of Satan, so that we don't hear God here. And we need to. Because remember, the giants are not bigger than God. And let's go to, as I mentioned, fear is crippling and a tool of the devil. Trust God to help you slay the giants. Proverbs 29:25. And Proverbs 29:25. All right, who has that one? Go ahead.
Fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe.
You know, the soldiers and Saul, they were only looking to themselves to keep them safe. If they had been looking to God to keep them safe, they would have been just like David did and ran towards him and said, God's going to take care of this. But they didn't. And, you know, so the fear of man, of the Philistines and, you know, everything going on, that was a snare to them. That tripped them up as they watched 2 times a day, watched him come and defy the army of the living God. But not David. Not David. David put his trust in God that he would be safe. You know, what can this world or man do to us that God doesn't have control of? Nothing. Nothing. No circumstance, no sin, no relationship, nothing is too big for God. And God is our safe haven. The Bible compares God to the mother hen. Is that what, am I saying that right? Mother hen? Mother chicken, yeah. And how we're kept safe under his wings. That God is our safety tower. And we need to view him as that, so that we understand as we face the giants in our life, God is going to keep us safe. There's no giant that's going to swallow us up in defeat. There's not. Only if we do not look to God. We can't be cowering in fear, because that's when it swallows us up. That's the tool of Satan, where Satan's like, okay, I've got them, because here they are looking at the giant in their life, and this is what they're doing. Instead of being like David and running at it and saying, God, I know you have this. Exactly what he does. God promises to be with us through both the good and the bad. I love that picture in the beginning of that chapter. The Philistines on one mountain and the army of God on the other mountain, and between was a valley. That's a great picture. And, you know, just thinking that whether it's the good, the bad, and we've talked about how we have mountaintops in our life. Those are good times. Those are when things are going great. And we also have valleys, you know, where the battles take place. Okay? They didn't stay on the mountains, the 2 armies. They had to meet in the valley and battle it out. And we, in our life, we get to valleys in our life where it can feel pretty scary. It can feel pretty lonely. But we have to remember that we don't need to fear. Joshua 1:9. Who has that one? Go ahead.
Have not I commanded thee, be strong, and of a good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest.
Whether thou goest up on the mountain and it's good, or whether that you're in the valley and you're fighting the battle, God is with us. Don't be dismayed. Do not let fear cripple you. Instead, just like David, haste and run at your giant with God. You know, God gives us the weapons that we need to fight these battles. It's right here. But too many times we turn to everything else rather than this. This is the weapon of choice. This is the only way we're going to defeat these giants in our life, is through his word and that relationship with him. And, you know, the Christian who thinks that they can live a healthy, successful, prosperous, victorious, that's really the word I'm looking for, victorious Christian life without being in the word, is a very disillusioned Christian that Satan is very happy with, because it is only through God's word and being in his word and studying to show ourselves approved so that we don't have to be ashamed. That is the only way we're going to be able to run towards a giant in our life. Otherwise, the weak Christian that's just surviving on the milk of the word, when they come to church, they're going to be the ones doing this, and they're not going to be running it. It's going to take, just like in battle, you know, they needed food, which is why Jesse's dad sent the food down. You know, okay, we're going to, and I'm sure, you know, many others were doing that, sending food to the soldiers so that they could continue to fight for, you know, for the Israelites. Us too. We've got to have food. We've got to have food to be able to face that giant. It's going to be the weak ones that are cowering and never see God's power. What an amazing thing. Even I was thinking about even all the other children of Israel, David's brothers, for example, and Saul, as they saw what God did through David. So then, my friend, it doesn't become just about David, does it? It's about, our life affects everybody else, you know, and people are always watching us. And we help other people when we're facing and running at our giants, and people see that, they're like, whoa, you know, and they stop and they do take notice. But they're also noticing when we're doing this, you know. And then you saw a strong Christian came along and said, is there not a cause? Hello, we're the children of God. You know, I want to be that. I want to be that strong Christian that others are seeing run right at the giants in my life and watching as God defeats the giants in my life. I want to be that Christian, but in order to be that, I have to be in his word. I have to have a relationship with him, a close relationship that all other things fade away, all the other interests in my life, you know, the things that I keep letting take priority over Jesus Christ, and he and his word become the priority in my life. That's where victory comes. That's where defeating the giants comes in, slaying them, not just facing them. I don't want us just to face the giants. I want us to slay them, because that's what God showed us he can do. David, and then just put real quick in the blue, just as David was a good shepherd to his sheep in killing the bear and lion, we have a good shepherd who cares for us in the darkest valleys of our life. It just had made me think that, you know, David got someone to watch his sheep. He didn't just leave them. And it just made me stop and think about what a good shepherd God is to us. Thy rod and thy staff have come from me. Who has Psalm 23:4? Donna?
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
And Pastor's been preaching on it. It's been really, really good. Been really good. God is the good shepherd. The last bullet point, David refused to wear King Saul's armor to face Goliath. He had not proved it. He had not seen that it would work to do what he needed it to do. But David did know how to use his slingshot and stones. He'd used those many times. Remember how you have spiritually slain giants in your life before with God's help. And we'll go back to that and repeat it and experience victory again. I can go back to a time in my life where I saw the giant fall down because God helped me to slay him. And so when I'm facing another giant, just as David did with the lion and the bear, I can look back to that and say, yeah, God, I remember what you did over there. Time to take this giant on and do it with the things that he has given me, the proven weapons. So I hope this was a blessing to you. Don't just face your giants, slay your giants. Because God gave us the example of David and Goliath, not just a kid's story. Man, not just a kid's story. And use this as a springboard for your for the rest of the week, and try to find some more nuggets in that one chapter, and you will. All right, thank you to our online friends. We look forward to seeing you back.
But it's nailed to the cross.